What's up, Planeswalkers? How you doing? I hope you're having an excellent week. So, the Wizards didn't release a regular story this week, so we're gonna do a one-shot, but still set in Ravnica. It's an older story from 2012, and it's a tale of the Rakdos Guild, which I am particularly excited about, as black and red, I think. Kinda suits my playstyle. Chaotic, aggressive, and some nasty tricks in there. That's how I like to play, personally. Big dumb monsters with gross death touch stuff. I love it. And then if you stay tuned and listen to the end, there'll be a special announcement at the end of the podcast. Slaughter Games by Jarrett. Merida slammed the door and slammed down the crossbar. It landed with a solid thud, barring her family's door and protecting them from the Rakdos outside. The guild was on parade, filling the streets with a dreadful cacophony of dragging chains, mad cackling, and the screams of agony by those who were swept up in their gruesome marching carnival. Merida crumpled and fell with her back to the wall, reaching out to pull her two children close. She whispered soothing words to her terrified children, trying to reassure them that they were safe now from the monster stomping past their home. The mob paraded by, filled with deranged glee. Homes, businesses, temples, and even government buildings closed and barred their doors as the vanguard of the Rakdos approached. It was a terrifyingly long procession, composed of almost all of the Rakdos Guild's ranks. Amidst the bloody parade, the carnival was in full swing with belated stilt walkers, a mobile aerial chain act, body-pierced high-flying trapeze artists, and other ghastly sights. Every member of Rakdos carried a murderous grin, being deliriously happy. For today marked the beginning of their slaughter games. The competition had been announced as 3 of Rakdos' rings battled over a recently vacated territory. And to make the most of the conflict, it was put up as a prize for this slaughter games. The slaughter games consume the guild for as long as it takes, until the victors stand bloodied but victorious. Only a fraction of the Rakdos followers win the games. To do so is to put life and limb on the line. They willfully put their life at risk for the spectacle of the games out of devotion for their demonic leader. Derix had been a champion spiker for 4 years slaughter games, though the games aren't annual, so he had actually been a winner through 7 slaughter games. Until last year, when he was dethroned by an upstart from Massacre Girl rings, Vildika. A tall and tightly corded female human who got the killing blow on a particularly agile victim that had dodged Derix's deadly swing of the hammer, only to be caught by one of Vildika's bladed boots in a graceful spinning kick. Derix found himself defeated, and Vildika crowned champion for the year's games. Derix's previous ringleader was the very unusual Stroko, a goblin who had devoted himself to Rakdos. Stroko had made good use of Derix as a spiker. He kept the little piece which benefited Stroko and caused the chaos which would further Stroko's goals. After Derix was defeated, he was worthless to Stroko, and with great derision he insulted Derix amidst a slaughter games feast. Derix, outraged, rose to his feet so quickly that he knocked over the feast table, scattering food and drink everywhere. He tore off his vest that bore the sigil of Stroko's ring and threw it down before storming out. He would start his own ring. He left the tent alone. Many bristled at the poor treatment of Derix, but none had been outraged enough to follow him during his exit from Stroko's ring. Derix had battled for territory and carved out a niche not too far from the festival grounds. Finally, the slaughter games had arrived once again, and Derix now marched past Merida's door, his ring marching around him. He wore a vest with a sigil of his own on his broad shoulders. He hung chains of his status around his shoulders, using large links to intimidate all who beheld his already massive frame. Further, he carried his spiked hammer on one shoulder, with his other hand leading the chains of his ring's supplicants. Derix may be a spiker, a pierced titan towering over the members of his ring, but he had discovered he also had a good mind for business. As angry as he was at Stroko's insult, he had learned a good deal from him. As chaos and frivolity reigned among the cult's ranks, It was the higher-ups who were tasked with carefully managing it to the prosperity of all. It was up to the ringmasters to organize, fund, and let the carnival continue in order to please Rakdos himself. And though he did not appear, every ringmaster knew that Rakdos watched these games with interest. Because of this, Derix hoped to find his ring elevated after they proved themselves at the slaughter games. Only a few weeks ago, he had recruited Vildika away from Massacre Girl. She walked beside him now, head held proudly high. She wore a form-fitting and low-cut dress with rows of piercings on her delicate features. In just these few weeks since her arrival, Vildika had proven herself a valuable ally and confidant in the matters of the ring, and he had found himself falling for her. As the ringmaster, Derix had begrudgingly chose not to compete, instead allowing Vildika to represent his ring in the games. He bristled as he thought how he would be a spectator this year, but he also knew that it was for the best. He was earning Rakdos' approval through his work outside of the arena now. As the enormous archway into the festival grounds neared, he looked through its high arch and saw an apparent waterfall of blood. Animal, human, centaur, and perhaps even merfolk, any being who had been swept up in the pre-game activities, was now used to welcome Rakdos' followers to the slaughter games. Derix grasped the spiked hammer in his massive fist and lifted it above his head as his ring entered the grounds, surrounded by shouts and jeers. Though the games were only for the strongest of wills, it drew countless onlookers. They stood on the edge of the grounds, quick to retreat and scatter for fear of suddenly finding themselves the latest plaything in the games. They had all come to see the horrifying games as they played out, and they were never disappointed. Derix led his ring to the arena he had chosen for their camp, directing them as to where to set up their tents and hammer the stakes. Once the procession had finished and all the various rings were settled, dark had fallen on Ravnica. The fairgrounds were lit by numerous fires, and the normally loud and cacophonous guild had quieted somewhat as they prepared for the games the next day. The other ring members were gone, and it was just Derix and Vildika sitting together next to the fire. Derix sharpened his spiked hammer before slamming it down on the remnant carcass of the beast that had been their dinner, testing its point. Vildika had removed her boots and was reclining next to him, pricking her fingers absent-mindedly as she watched the blood well.
"Do you miss Massacre Girl?"
Derix asked questioningly between strokes of the whetstone. He was honestly curious. She had joined him willingly, but he knew also that they had been close for many years.
"I mean her, and her ring."
Showing little emotion, Vildika replied, "Rarely." And after a moment's pause, she added, "I joined your ring because it was clear that she no longer saw me as anything but a combatant in the games, a trophy. I was her trophy to parade around, not a member to share the carnival with." Emotion had crept into her voice as she spoke, anger intermingling with sadness. Derix considered her response. It wasn't unsurprising. It was common for ringleaders to take their slaughter game victors and raise them onto a dais. Stroko had done the same to him for years, but in those times he had enjoyed it. He was celebrated, known, and he had had whatever he had wanted, except for closeness to anyone but Stroko. Oh sure, he had companions to enjoy the bloody carnivals and circus, and he never wanted for much, but he had plenty of time to reflect back on who he had been and compare with who he was now.
"Are you ready to compete tomorrow?"
Derix still could not hide the fact he wished he was in the competition. Vildika's sharp laugh rang through the ring's tents. "Have you seen the spikers from other rings? They're pathetic. Even Erzadalt, that hulk that Rainier has been grooming for years, he's hardly ready, and I'll strike him down without a worry. It almost doesn't seem sporting this time around." She pricked her index finger in 3 quick motions, watching the blood well before it slid down her finger onto her palm. Derix nodded. He had felt the same way for many years, completely confident in his victory. And even last time he'd been confident in his victory, at least until Vildika surprised everyone. "How much did you wager on me?" curiosity clear in her voice. Ringleaders always made wagers with one another over the game, sometimes for money, sometimes for people, and sometimes for promises.
More than I did on anyone else.
Derix had wagered across all of his combatants and game's participants, but he had wagered the majority of his ring stockpile on Vildika, a move his money keepers were none too happy with. Vildika pricked her finger one more time and clenched the bloody fingers into a fist. She allowed herself to smile. Tomorrow, the games would finally begin. Well, that's it. That's just a little quick one for you, a little teasy tease of the Ravnica Rakdos. Man, that's nasty. So many piercings, pricking your fingers. Yeesh! Merfolk blood. Is it blue? Is it black? Is it green? Is it purple, maybe? I don't know. I don't know these things. Maybe someday we'll find out, everybody. So, that was super fun. I love this plane so much. Can't even deal with it. So here's the big exciting announcement. I have partnered with Aether Hub, the #1 Vorthos YouTube channel, which has been for years bringing Magic fans amazing content about the history and lore of all of the planes and the planeswalkers and various characters of the Magic omniverse. Partnering with them to become the official voice of the Aether Hub. So, in addition to catching me here on this podcast, you can catch me on YouTube a couple times a week bringing sweet, in-depth lore videos. Not the stories like this, but more just broken down history and lore. Like that. Stuff like that. And also, as well as, we're going to do some Commander deck techs, which I'm so excited for. Deck techs coming for you. Deck techs coming on through. Magic, the musical. Let's make it happen, maybe. Let's do it. Let's write it. So I'm super excited about that. And also, if you want to listen to those deck techs and lore videos during your commute or wherever you do your podcast listening, I'm also going to be starting a second podcast called the Aether Hub that's about that stuff. But if you just want the stories, you just want that sweet audiobook experience, you can just stay right here and hang out. It's not going to change. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to do this forever. Forever! Cool. Anyways, I'm very excited about all that. We'll be starting that. I'll send out, social media blast. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at mtgwithcp, as well as shoot me an email, Carolyn@carolynpage.com. Simple, easy. That's my name. Check it out. And Patreon is helping to fund the show. You, the listeners, the patrons, are actually making all of this possible, and I really can't thank you enough. If you want to head over to patreon.com/mtgwithcp, there we go. You can become a patron and get access to exclusive stories, cool voting, Q&As, and other sweet magic-related things. Cool. Let's talk about magic a little bit more, because there's extra time. So, I built a Thantis the Warweaver deck, because my playgroup, we decided to do a spooky Halloween commander theme, and I had a Thantis from, I'd taken apart the Lord Windgrace commander deck from Commander 19. And Thantis the Warweaver is just a big old spider that everything has to attack every turn, if possible, which is so fun. Like, messing with other people's gameplay like that. So, it was good in one-on-one, but then multiplayer, it just didn't cut it. And it was some of the worst defeats I've ever had as a planeswalker in my whole planeswalking life. It was terrible. I mean, I had to discard down to 4 the second game, and it was brutal. I literally played nothing. I didn't play anything the whole game. And surprise, 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 I lost. So, we shall try again, rise again. But Sphinxes are still doing pretty good, so that's really where my heart's at. And I think I'm gonna build a Mizzix of the Magnus. I think he's a goblin commander that you put some kind of counter on him, and then he makes sorceries and instants cost less for that many counters, which is pretty sweet. I want to build like a goblin tribal sorcery instant kind of thing. Just very like warpy, chaos warp, weird stuff. Let's get weird with it. Cool, alright, well that's enough blabbering for me. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that little snippet of a story. I'll be posting a new story next week when we get the next installment of these Ravnica stories. Alright, sweet. Happy planeswalking. Ciao for now.